It is an excellent segue to panel 2 on implementation of these high aspirations through transparency and digitalization of reconstruction efforts, the past and current examples of digital solutions to demonstrate Ukraine's best practices. And I am looking forward to hearing from some of the experts and advocates who helped Ukraine to achieve tremendous progress in digitization over the past decade. You really will hear about some world-class solutions that are being utilized to attain the successes and that progress that Ukraine has shown in its battle against corruption. I think we have our panel seated. We do. I have done the minimum amount of filibustering necessary to get everyone in their chair. And now I'm passing over to Daniel Bruce, the Chief Executive of TI in the UK, who will moderate this panel. Daniel?
Thank you very much, Norm. Good morning, everyone, distinguished guests, and thanks to our hosts here at EBRD once again this morning. A few introductory remarks, and then I will introduce our panel as we go along for efficiency in our use of time. Once again, I'll do, I think, one quick lightning round of questions, and then we'll get into a discussion with everybody assembled in the room and online, if that's possible as well. I'm sure now at the end of this long week, the $400 billion figure cited by the World Bank as that being necessary for reconstruction and repair of the damage already caused in Ukraine since Russia's further invasion last year is a number which everybody is already very familiar with now, more than 1.5 times Ukraine's GDP from 2021. A huge amount of money to mobilize and a huge amount of money to spend. And in this context, how do we ensure that this investment into recovery is well spent, that the support of donors at the private sector is coordinated, that it is matched to the most pressing needs, and that as much as possible, that investment is immune from corruption. And on that point, I would align myself with the comments of our previous moderator, Greta, in that we have to have a big dollop of realism here. We can't guarantee that every single cent is going to be well spent, but how are we going to do our very best? And what are the systems and the oversight needed to ensure that we can achieve as much of that goal as possible? We're going to look at the strategic importance of transparency and accountability mechanisms in this discussion. And in particular, we're going to zoom in a bit on some of the digital solutions that already exist in Ukraine and some of those that are coming down the pipe as well. And ask the question, could this be an opportunity to really rethink the whole process, going beyond just a transparent online portal approach, but a digital ecosystem, language that we've already heard used this morning, that links damage assessment, budgets, project planning, procurement and delivery in an integrated way to support better coordination and delivery with independent oversight. So without further ado, let me turn to the distinguished panel assembled either side of me. I would like to start with the civil society perspective on all of this, and Victor Nestula, who is sitting to my left. Victor is the head of Ukraine support for OCP and is also chair of the RISE coalition. Victor, I'm going to ask you two questions, actually. Firstly, could you give us your general perspective on the importance of civil society engagement in the reconstruction process and how you feel, where you feel that is at the moment? Does it need to be greater? Does it need to be more dynamic? And to really stimulate some conversation with the rest of the panel, then I'd also like you to introduce us to DREAM, which is an acronym we've heard mentioned already. This is Ukraine's digital reconstruction ecosystem for accountable management. So the civil society perspective, and then some headlines on what DREAM is and where it's going. Victor, thank you.
Thanks. Two huge questions, and definitely won't have time to cover both. But if you want to know more, we have some leaflets with DREAM QR codes. You can subscribe for our newsletters, and those who were at URC probably saw our touch screens where you already can play with the tool. But I want to start with the context, because we had so many discussions over the last couple of days and today, but unfortunately, we've forgot to mention that we are still fighting the full-scale invasion of Russia. Tonight, I woke up because of air sirens at my phone. 12 missiles. Luckily, they were all intercepted thanks to international support and air defense. In May, it was very heavy. 23 days out of 30, we had like huge attacks. And with that, Ukraine planned reforms, Ukraine implements reforms, Ukraine works on reconstruction planning, it keeps good democratic governance, civil society works with government, investigative media could do their job, and just 2 days ago there was another amazing investigation from our journalists who unveiled corruption, and luckily we have Integrity Infrastructure, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, Prosecutor's Office, who are dealing with all these things. So let's not forget about the context. And while we all demand Ukraine, to do great reforms, let's support us to make sure that we have all the capacity and capability. Prozoro was mentioned today, by the way. It's a great example of civil society cooperation with the government of Ukraine and international partners and business. Prozoro was developed outside of the government, in fact, based on Transparency International Ukraine, and I was happy to be a head of steering committee on behalf of Transparency of Ukraine when it was developed. And after the successful piloting, Prozoro was transferred to government, right? So there was so many other initiatives like that, including Prozoro Sale, e-health, e-data, and Ukraine before the war was leader in transparency, global leader in transparency based on Transparency Index that evaluates 129 countries. Ukraine is was number one before the war. Assets declarations, beneficiary owners, Ukraine is #1 country that disclosed openly its beneficiary owners in a structured data. Land registry, procurement data, Prozoro truly, as open contracting partnership who works globally and runs open contracting data standard, I can reassure you that Prozoro is the most transparent system in the world and provides the best procurement data from planning to contract implementation, including transactions, including payments. Of course, transparency doesn't mean integrity, doesn't mean accountability, and there is a way forward to work with this. But there are great cases, including on Ukrainian procurement enterprises, like Ukrainian Postal Service, right? It's an amazing example of public procurement, like one of the most efficient procuring entities that are actually benchmarked to corporate, to private companies. And they learned from Ukrainian Postal Service how they conduct their procurement using Prozoro. Or medical procurement of Ukraine. Today we mentioned that international companies are afraid or not willing to bid in Prozoro. Medical procurement of Ukraine is another great example where companies like Pfizer, Merck, AbbVie, and others are bidding directly through Prozoro, not through Ukrainian branches, but by internationals, and supplying medicines, vital medicines, even now, during the war. So we, of course, have to work on improving integrity, improving efficiency, improving accountability, but there are great cases. We just have to continue what we've been doing before, supporting all those leaders who implement these transformations. And you asked about role of civil society. In most of these cases, civil society played a crucial role, either by advocacy or by some strange role for Ukrainian civil society, which we call co-governance, where we are ready to take part of the responsibility and not just say that government, you must do this and that, but say that government, you must do this and that, but we are actually here to help you, and we are ready to do it together, like with Prozoro. So here comes our dream, digital restoration ecosystem for accountable management, and that's another example how RISE Ukraine, reconstruction, integrity, sustainability, and efficiency, foundational principle of the reconstruction, came to the Ministry of Infrastructure last May and said, like, guys, let's try to tackle this challenge. 200,000 objects so far are damaged or destroyed. Try to manage that scale of the reconstruction without smart digital solution. So civil society, open contracting partnership, Transparency International Ukraine, BRDO, offered the government to jointly digitize the process, and the government agreed. So far, we are doing the DREAM together by DREAM Project Office led by Open Contracting Partnership in collaboration with Transparency International and BRDO, Rise Ukraine Coalition, but also with the leadership of Ministry of Reconstruction and Agency for Restoration. It's a joint effort that eventually will make sure that every single dollar, hryvnia, pound, euro invested in our country is invested, first of all, smartly, because DREAM starts with recovery planning. We don't have to rebuild school if it was damaged. We have to solve the problem that the community has. And the problem is 50 children don't have access to education. So first of all, DREAM helps to properly plan how to solve this problem, whether to relocate these children to neighboring school, whether to buy buses to send them to a neighboring school, or maybe if there is no other discussion, to actually build the infrastructure. And if there is a decision to build infrastructure, DREAM then will provide like all the templates to prepare machine readable feasibility study that complies with the requirement of multilateral development banks on actually what you are guys looking when you are making your investment decisions into the infrastructure. There will be so many challenges for our communities. Capability and capacity is low. And our ask is, first of all, let's all use DREAM, and I will not use much time to describe it right now, but let's all use DREAM, and let's all invest in capability and capacity of our communities who will be the core in our reconstruction.
It really does sound like a fascinating platform, and I hope there'll be coffee-based opportunities for your brains to be picked a little more on that as we go through the day. I'd like to get a governmental perspective on this now, and sitting to my right is Pierre Halbron, who is President Macron of France, Special Envoy for Aid and Reconstruction Support in Ukraine, and also, I gather, an ex-Vice President of our hosts, the EBRD. What is France's assessment, sort of in response to this context, and of the architecture that you need to mobilize more support into Ukraine, and what else would you like to see?
So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, obviously, to come back to this board room where we spent a lot of time, also in the last 5 years when I was vice president, working on this subject. You mentioned Prozoro, but also the business ombudsman, the Ukraine reform architecture, which are key, in fact, to establish the infrastructure, which is really needed also to give trust and confidence to all partners, so that they look at Ukraine now having also the conviction that it will be a huge opportunity for them to put their investment in the country. So from our perspective, from Paris, and also meeting a lot of French companies and European companies, I think there are some issues which are really on the forefront and we have to tackle. First, the question about the speed and when do we have to think about reconstruction, because everybody is asking, why do you talk about that now, why there is war? The question is, first, how we prepare ourselves and obviously our private sector to look at Ukraine as a market full of potential. I think for a European country like France, obviously we have a special responsibility in supporting obviously Ukraine as a European and a future member of the European Union, which is quite specific, because we know that we'll be around the same table as Ukraine in a few years, and on an equal footing with our companies, we hope, being long-term partners of Ukrainian companies. That requires quite a lot of different things, which are different from one sector to another one. It happens that French companies are the first employers, foreign employers in Ukraine, which is not always very well known, but French banks are very present in the retail sector and all of that. And these companies stayed after the 24th of February, because they know that it's a long-term investment, also given the size and the potential of the country. The challenge is more for companies which do not the market, which are interested, because when we organized, for example, this bilateral conference in Paris on the 13th of December, there were nearly 1,000 companies present, which expressed their interest in looking at Ukraine as a destination of investment. But we have to transform more or less interest into concrete projects and concrete interest. And that hinges on many different things. I think Gabriel and others mention insurance, instruments. EBRD has worked on a very interesting instrument, which we are looking into also to support it in one way or another in the next weeks. We've announced also a national scheme for French companies 2 days ago, which will cover the insurance against war risk for French companies investing in Ukraine. But that obviously is not enough. And that's, by the way, not the first issue French companies at least put on the list of their conditions or concerns to enter the market. And the first conditions are very much not new, because they were pre-existing also the war. And when I was here, also we were making a lot of efforts to attract, sometimes without huge success, foreign companies into the Ukrainian market. I think they relate to governance. They relate also to the perception of around the risks, also linked to the business environment. There is part of reality, there is part of probably excessive caution, but there are also part of truth in the experience of many of these potential clients in companies in that way. So also, given the importance of the accession process, the fact that embedding also these efforts in a process which is a long-term process, I think this is really fundamental. Instruments like DREAM are fundamental. What I would say is that instruments are not enough. First, instruments have to really meet the needs of also the financiers of the reconstruction. So this should be embedded, in fact, in the G7 plus platform, because if it's not, you will have a multiplication of new initiatives and instruments which are not connected one to another. So what is very good is that it builds on what we've achieved on Prosoro, but afterward there is still not at least the detailed understanding from the international donors that it exactly fits their need in terms of transparency, and the fact that they will have, and we will have, all of us, to report and to be accountable to our national parliament, who vote also big budgets for the support to Ukraine. So I would say that's also a very important element which would make all this ecosystem be a game changer in attracting foreign and private investment in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you very much. That actually leads me, I think, quite nicely onto the World Bank perspective. If I can come down to the end of the row, Georg Sargsen, who is the manager for the World Bank in Ukraine. What do you need in terms of the systems? We've had a few times this morning this discussion about the interconnectedness and the interoperability of what is being developed in the transparency and accountability system. How much further does that need to go, and what else are your sort of major preoccupations at this stage?
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. It's great to be here. I think this is probably one of the best attended side events at the conference. Clearly indicates, interest. Also helps me to set my priorities right before I move to Kiev on Monday, where we are reopening the World Bank office. So this is really great opportunity to, in a way, digest and prioritize. Now, I think, given what has been said in terms of the scale of the reconstruction need, the massive funding that will be required, and understanding a lot of that will come from development partners, Ukrainian government has kind of dual challenge to make sure that they have both confidence of the public and the confidence of its partners. and their objective is the same, the expectation is the same, but the methods of engagement and what is required for them is probably somewhat different. And I think there are people in the room who know much better what is Ukrainian public's expectation. So I won't focus on that, but we'll speak more in terms of what probably development partners are looking for. And by the way, I want to commend the government and echo what some of my colleagues already have said, that despite this extremely difficult and tragic situation, the government has been undertaking serious reforms, right? Eka talked a lot about the Prozora reforms that are being undertaken. I will try to also cover a little bit that, but in general, it's really impressive. I want to give credit where it's due. Now, I think there are four areas or four things that the partners, development partners and financiers would expect. One is being able to trace the funds, the traceability of the funding. Second, making sure that funds have been used for the intended purpose. The third one would be, value for money, cost effectiveness, basically. And then the fourth one is that the services, goods or works that have been delivered are of the quality that was expected, right? So those are the four things. So when we think, how do we structure, design, use different tools, platforms, and so on, we need to have this in mind. Now, two risks I see, apart from the fact that, okay, maybe things will go sideways and, funds will not come, but two risks I see. One is, if this system is not in place or the perception stays, then there is going to be an attempt to ring fence each individual operation project. And it is going to be a disaster for such massive scale of funding that will be channeled to Ukraine. If you do it a couple of billions a year, that's fine. If you are doing tens or hundreds of billions, trying to ring fence each operation and apply your own rules, that is going to slow down tremendously the reconstruction effort. The second one is actually the bureaucracy fearing to act, to make decisions because of that whole ecosystem that is put there and the risk of being prosecuted for making decisions. And honestly, I already witnessed that today. I see that officials actually feel sometimes more comfortable not making decisions than making decisions which might be wrong, right? So we need to make sure that there is a right balance that is put in place. Otherwise, things will just get stuck and may not move. You cannot automate every single decision. Maybe at one point AI will do it for us, but then we probably will not have our jobs anymore. So, so let's focus on the kind of what is working, right? So let me give an example of the World Bank project. It's called Peace. It's the largest project in the history of the World Bank, maybe all IFIs. It has channeled in the last 15 months over $20 billion of partner funding and the World Bank funding to maintain core government functions and services. So the responsibility for us is kind of double, because not only our money, but so many partners have entrusted us, many of them are in this room, the funding. So, and yet, so far, we're very pleased with the way it works, right? So what is in place there? There are a few things. So we use digital traceable payment mechanisms, so we know that where the money go, how they reach every individual who needs to pay salaries, pensions, and medical services and so on. We use the online grievances redress mechanism, and by the way, this is one area where I feel sort of crowd sourcing the feedback from the community, society in general, that is missing, right? Then we do monthly surveys or regular surveys to understand whether beneficiaries actually benefited from the surveys. And actually, the results are super positive. In this environment, and I'll just quote you a couple of numbers, 91% of essential public service workers received payments on time. And then the rest got slight delays, right? More than 97% pensioners were paid on time. And some of our countries may not be able to claim this in regular times, right? Most people reported that even in the areas under hostilities, the health clinics remain open and they could access the services. This is what we have been funding, but we have been able to trace money, to get the feedback, where the feedback needs certain interventions, sort of make sure that these interventions are in place, rectify, and then understand the impact that we're making. Again, Ukraine does have incredible digital sort of ecosystem in place, right? And we talked about Dream. DIA, I'm sure, has been covered or will be covered. Of course, Prozoro, which we are strongly supporting and trying to make sure that it's expanded, that it's made more acceptable to certain foreign players and bidders who, for example, Prozoro's original version was only based on list cost, for example, right? But there are some procurements that will not be possible to follow. Now it's being changed. Multi-currency element, it's being changed and so on, right? So a lot will change, and we do have a lot of trust in that. But what I want to maybe end with, it's great to have the digital system. We also need to make sure that it comes with right digital infrastructure, it comes with the ability of every individual resident to participate in digital process, and that also the digital education is in place so they know what they are doing and how they are part of that. But also that let's make sure that we do not make digital as a panacea. There are so many ways to undermine the system or misuse the digital system. And that's why I want to end with the civil society part. We have been doing fairly unconventional things for the World Bank in Ukraine in terms of engaging with civil society. We have been funding investigative journalism to be able to investigate, identify, report on corruption cases or on misuse. And we are very much impressed with results. We are going to continue to do that. We are going to use civil society for third-party monitoring of our projects and programs, both at this stage and at the stage of recovery and reconstruction. We are funding civil society to engage with the government on the dialogue on what it means providing government services and how they can be improved. So it's great to support the digital solutions. We should all do that. They are part of it, but they are not the entirety. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a quick time check. We have 10 minutes for this panel left. So I'm going to invite our next two speakers to be as pithy as you can, so we can at least get a couple of questions in. But Malika, can I come to you, Mika Dalovic, from the EBRD, Director for Competitiveness, Governance and Political Affairs here. Obviously, long involved in the Ukrainian context before the conflict. Are there particular learnings that you think really stand out now from existing initiatives and the experience of the EBRD's engagement in Ukraine that are relevant to some of the points that are coming out here as we look forward?
Thank you very much. And first, I need to say I'm really glad that we are having this event, hosting it here in the EBRD. And when we were preparing it, we were thinking maybe it would have been better to have it ahead of the conference. And I'm actually really glad it's happening on Friday, that we can come and discuss this after the official program and when everybody is more relaxed. And I think for us, it's really important because of the partnerships and because of the topic. And it's also because I was thinking as I was preparing for this, when we've signed a memorandum, actually it was anti-corruption initiative in 2014. And back to Artyom's comment, is this the perception of corruption or the corruption that we are fighting in Ukraine? I would say that in Ukraine, we've been engaged since 2014 in this field. And it's not something that we have been imposing on the country. It's something that the country wanted to do and which we were actively helping it to do. And working as EBRD in a number of different other countries where you have transparency and accountability, state capture challenges, Ukraine was the one moving in the right direction before the war. So I'm not trying to say that this was challenge-free or the journey was done, but we clearly were observing a movement in the right direction. Now, when the war struck, and I think Christoph mentioned some of the initiatives that we were engaged with, Business Ombudsman, that was actually came out of this first memorandum of understanding on the anti-corruption initiative and the Ukraine reform architecture, which was meant of providing the government with the capacity to act, which then reduces also the pressures on accountability, transparency, and corruption pressures. When you think about what the lessons are and what are the things that really matter for us, I think we've repurposed a lot of what was happening before the war, and what we thought before the war, okay, some of these projects will be brought to an end, and we will be passing over to Ukrainian institutions, because, for example, the Business Ombudsman, for example, was meant to be the wake-up call to institutions, and the Ukraine reform architecture was supposed to, in some way or the other, transition into the public administration. Now, obviously, when the war hit, everything became different. And I think, for me, the most challenging thing, taking it also into account what Georg said, and I think all of us around the table can say that Ukraine prompted us to do something that we've never done before, to support the resilience and actually to assist the country in doing an amazing thing. For me, the biggest challenge is managing, on one hand, what you need to do to deliver under wartime circumstances. This means suspending some of the regular practices, doing things faster than you would normally do it. On the other, to still do it in a way which uphold the rules in the long term, not to erode your capacity to be rule-abiding in the long term, and also not to create a new challenges in reconstruction, because there will be huge funds available, and how do you address this challenge is very much a task for all of us as donors and international community around the table, because a lot will depend on how we coordinate ourselves, but also on the demand in the country. I somehow, having seen Ukraine before the war and knowing and remembering from Maidan that this was about the European country's European future, but also about being governed in a transparent and accountable manner, I have no doubts that the civil society will hold the government to account. What I think we will try to do, and we as international financial institutions, we are not going to do things like judiciary reform, enforcement agencies. We are going to concentrate on what we do as investor. And there, the next panel that is coming, it's public funds, state-owned enterprises, how state-owned enterprises, which will absorb a huge chunk of funds in the reconstruction, how they are governed, but also how we can complement with our policy interventions to make this ecosystem. Now, back to the digital and what is it that can be done. And there, I probably, one of the things which for us was relevant in terms of this, how we can support reconstruction digitally, was Aid Energy platform, which was a vehicle for international coordination and also a vehicle for coordination within Ukraine, where we basically set up a digital tool where the donors can track the needs in Ukraine, but also track the delivery and procurement. These are huge amounts involved, so it doesn't also assist delivery, which is what I think is absolutely needed, but it makes for more transparent and more accountable process.
I'm
probably best to end here, and then maybe somebody will ask more questions later. Thank you.
I would say we've heard a fair bit about some of the nervousness, if I can call it that, of the private sector, as well as the sort of challenge of potentially too much bureaucracy and it being easier not to make a decision than make a decision. But from the private sector perspective, Gustavio Busio, Government Affairs Director for the EMEA region, FMC. How do you respond to some of those points that we've heard from Pierre already around some of the concerns that French companies had and what we heard in the earlier session? And if you can do that in 2.5 minutes, that will give us 2.5 minutes for questions as well.
Thank you. I'll try, and good morning, everyone. I heard the debate on idealism versus realism. Of course, as a private sector, I'm going to take the idealist, the idealist point of view. I will make just 2 points. I will try to give an oversimplified overview of what the businesses' needs are. I cannot speak on behalf of all businesses, but I'll give it a try. And I will close with talking about values. At the end of the day, what we in the private sector need is to be able to perform a risk and benefit assessment to make sure that if we are going to convince a board of directors, if you're a listed company, your investors, your shareholders, to go and take such a risky move, to go and tell them we're going to invest in a country that's undergoing war, as we heard, it needs to make sense. And that is about predictability. That predictability is about the physical safety of our employees, of the assets, of the investment. We heard about insurance. I think this issue is recognized by the government of Ukraine, by the international partners, and I think it will be solved. Then we need good laws. We can ask, somebody said about AI, we can ask ChatGPT to draft the best laws that we can, but the good laws, unless they are enforced properly, they're just words. I can give you an example. FMC is a company in crop protection business, R&D, IP protection, patent protection. So we are, for us, this type of law enforcement is important. And a market access for international partners. I'm looking at Pierre at the other end of the table. Yes, we hear as business, Ukraine has now preferential market access into the EU. It will become a member. Turkey would tell them, be careful, because it may take a long time, but we understand that this is serious. But having the certainty that there will be market access will allow businesses to define not only if to invest in Ukraine or not, but how much. And I will close very quickly on the values. The company, 2 weeks after the war, the full-scale invasion started, decided to leave the Russian market. We are committed to demining. Thank you. We're committed to demining. In agriculture, there's no reconstruction of the agricultural system in Ukraine without clearing mines and explosive contamination from the fields. And we're doing our part there. So these are decisions that were not easy. They're the difficult decisions, but they're the ethical decisions. And I think going back to the conditions that need to be there, in one way, it's education. It's education for civil society. We heard it a lot on anti-corruption, and it's creating the incentives for companies to actually make decisions that are ethical. The last closing remark, think of ESG. 20 years ago, it was on the idealist side of things, to talk about sustainability, to talk about the environment. And now it's realist. If us companies do not have robust plans on this front, we will be punished. So I close with that, and thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Gustavo. I'm looking at our timekeepers opposite me, and I suspect we've run out of road.
15 seconds.
You have 2 minutes, two minutes for questions. I'm going to take 2 questions, that being the case. Can I just remind you to turn a microphone on in front of you if you have one, or wait for a microphone to come to you so that the online audience can hear, and also the translators. I think there was a lady here. No, that's what I haven't got here. Okay, I'm going to come to the lady there and then the gentleman there, and briefly as well, and if you could introduce yourself as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Elena Koval, and I'm head of civil society engagement at the EBRD. Resilient civil societies is extremely important for the bank strategic approach, and we've been supporting civil societies for as long as EBRD exists, obviously. And we can see, and everybody's talking about the importance of civil societies in Ukraine during war and during reconstruction period. referring to Prozoro, which was one of the first projects that EBRD supported back in 2017. But what my question would be, and it's mainly for Victor, who is representing one of the largest coalition of civil societies at the moment, and we've been cooperating previously, where else you would see EBRD's role in supporting capacity building of civil societies, including economic integration of internally displaced people, including transparency and accountability and immediate need, of course, within the EBRD mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. Victor, hold that thought, and I'll come to you for a quick answer on that in a minute, and the question from the gentleman opposite.
Josh Rudolph, German Marshall Fund. The question is, how do officials and business executives in DC, London, Brussels keep up with Ukraine on digitalized transparency? I have to say, the first time I was at an event like this and asked somebody for a copy of their research report and I received a QR code, of course, it was from a Ukrainian, Yuri Romashko, who's sitting right over there. And so this week, I came ready. I brought our own QR code of our new report. I was so excited to show it to my Ukrainian friends, put it on the table, and they look at each other and they pull out their latest and it's got 4 QR codes on it. So exactly, there it is. We heard at URC a lot about DREAM. It was in yesterday's co-chair statement, comments on stage, European Investment Bank endorsing it. What we did not hear is what Norm and I have been recommending. It's on page 50, which is that the donors themselves commit to using DREAM, which is a bit more digital transparency than they're used to. It sounded a bit this week to me like transparency for thee, but not for me. So how do we keep up?
Yes, so we are a coalition of 49 civil society organizations, mostly focused on good governance and anti-corruption. We have people who work on energy, we have people who work on sustainability, but we define civil society as a much broader term, right? For us, it's also entrepreneurs, for example, right? And it's very much important to support entrepreneurship spirit in Ukraine because it's a foundation for also our resilience. So for sure, EBRD, it would be great if EBRD will be able to support IDPs integration, yes, SME support, inclusive practices, women-owned businesses, and so on and so forth, because it will be very much needed, especially to make sure that people are coming back to Ukraine. And most of refugees, unfortunately, are women with children.
Thank you, Victor. And I'm going to turn to Pierre, if I may, for the final word. How do governments keep up with the pace of development? Briefly, if you will. Thank you.
Yes, no, very briefly. No, I think it depends a lot on ownership by us, but also engagement of our friends who have devised DREAM with donors, so that we may make sure in the next weeks that it fits in the reporting accountability constraints of also donors. And I think that work has not been completely done for the time being, and I hope that in the next weeks we'll be able to do that, because Ukraine has no time, but also donors want to be really speedy in delivering their commitment and promises.
Thank you. Just Malika just wants to come in with, she promises me one sentence on this topic.
How do we keep up? At this stage, like to say that we have a very strong contingent of Ukraine staff. And that's basically how we keep up, because it's they are driving, both clients and staff are driving the innovation that we then are trying to implement as a bank.
Thank you. And Victor, 15 seconds, and I promise we're done.
On DREAM, believe us, we've been approaching governments, MDBs, with requests to work together on DREAM requirements, but unfortunately, it was not treated that seriously, as similarly as Prozoro at the very beginning. And thanks to URC, when DREAM finally is endorsed by many internationals, but also by the government of Ukraine, I believe that next couple of weeks will be really productive with all of you to understand your requirements, so you better understand DREAM and it's actually properly implemented. Thanks.
Well, thank you, panelists. The advantage we have is there is now coffee, I believe, so questions can continue outside. Thank you all very much. Norman.
We'll expect everybody back very sharply at 11:30. So grab your coffee, feel free to bring it in. Have a pastry, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, panel.